Welcome back to ViewPoint. I'm joined now by Labor's Ed Husic, member for Chifley, Shadow Treasurer, Parliamentary Secretary for the Shadow Treasurer. I've just given you a promotion.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting conversation with Chris Bowen after the show.
Indeed. Look, I want to come to you to this issue of terrorism and the issues with the Muslim community in a moment. But first up, in your role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Treasurer, I want to talk about the budget. Parliament going back this week. You're all looking forward to the argy-bargy and dealing with the government over its budget proposals. First up from you, I want to know whether you can tell me what policies, what economic policies the Labor Party has changed since losing the election.
Well, I don't think really anything that we've changed or reviewed or taken a different standpoint on really matters at this point in the cycle because, frankly, we've gone straight into a budget where the big problem has been that the government's been unable to be able to get the broader community support for the budget well over 100 days since it was brought down. And part of the reason for that is twofold. One is the budget runs contrary to the type of suggestions and promises made.
Come to the government's budget.
The second thing is, well, I just want to make this
I want to know about the Labor Party. The Labor Party delivered
The second point is they chop and change in the aftermath of the budget of what they're doing. So it really doesn't matter at this point what Labor's position is, given how early it is in the cycle. What really matters now is getting coherence, and you're not getting that out of the government.
Well, it matters what Labor does because Labor in the Senate can combine with other parties to block what the government does. But it also matters as far as the Labor Party is concerned. You're a part of a government that delivered record series of deficits, that promised to return the budget to surplus and failed, and then you suffered a historically bad election loss. So in the wake of that loss, what have you done as a party, as the Labor Party, to recognise that loss, recognise you got the economic and budgetary settings wrong and change your policies?
I think a critical speech was delivered by the Shadow Treasurer was post the budget to the National Press Club, where he outlined the type of things that we do need to do in terms of growing the economy. The big challenge that we had as a government and that this government's confronting is declining revenue because the economy isn't as strong as it can be because of international local
Revenue's
factors.
still growing. You're saying
So
revenue not growing as strongly as you had forecast.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's been a problem. And this government has found that as well, because why are they ditching promises left, right, and centre? The reality has confronted them.
But you were resoundingly defeated by the public, and you had trouble with delivering a budget outcome you'd forecast. Yet all the policy settings, whether it's the carbon tax, the mining tax, you're sticking by them.
No, we actually said what we're sticking by, particularly in terms of carbon pricing, is going to an ETS and a market-based system to help drive down emissions. We think that as mining moves more into extraction as opposed to the investment phase it's been in, turning your back on a proposal to be able to get a better share of that the profits that come out of mining, well, that's as they say in Yes Minister, a very courageous decision by the coalition, and you just can't keep relying on personal tax, and we do have a challenge in terms of reducing corporate rates of tax as well, and you need to diversify the way that you snare revenue. Well, this government's made a series of decisions coming into office that's coming back to bite them, and really it doesn't matter what, as I said to you before, Labor's position is on it. The coalition's got to get its house in order.
They do indeed, and Labor is blocking some of their key measures in the Senate, so therefore what Labor decides is very important. But I suppose the short answer you're giving me is that subsequent to the election, Labor has not changed its economic policies.
Well, I was trying to actually explain earlier that one of the things that we do need to find is a way to grow the economy, and particularly in terms of innovation and freeing up the way that new businesses can emerge within the economy, and that's what Chris Bowen was talking about at the Press Club. These are some of the things that we need to do, but we don't resolve from the fact that this government it said that it would make a series of commitments to the Australian people, and we are not going to aid and abet their attempts to break those commitments. And we've said on principle that there are a number of things we couldn't support. But we did, for instance, support the move, for example, to introduce the levy on higher income
Which
earners.
was a blatant broken promise you were happy to facilitate.
And, well, I mean, the government can be held to account for that, but there have been some things that we've let go through, and then it really comes down to what you're going to hold us on this show or elsewhere to account in terms of you saying, well, what are you prepared to do? Well, when we're prepared to do them, you criticise us. When we're not prepared to do them, you criticise us. So it's an interesting spot you've got us in.
Well, you're in politics, Ed. I think you can wear a bit of criticism. Let's just, before we leave this, just have a look at what the Prime Minister had to say in a speech in Adelaide on Saturday. And again, he was trying to set the scene for this return to Parliament and the budget's desperate need, the government's desperate need to get its budget measures through the Senate.
A stronger budget is the key to a stronger economy, because if the budget stays weak, that means higher taxes, that comes out of your pockets, that means more borrowings, and that means higher interest rates, and again, that comes out of your pockets.
Prime Minister Tony Abbott trying to explain the bigger implications of not getting the budget under control, back into surplus, I suppose. Do you at least concede that that Labor needs to play a constructive role in the medium term, getting the budget back into surplus?
I think absolutely, and that's been what we've said is we are prepared to be constructive, and I do think longer term that's certainly an issue. But you know, as I said, you know, the decisions, I made reference to this in my comments earlier. When coming to government, you know, this government made a series of decisions that cost them. You know, they handed over nearly $9 billion to the Reserve Bank. They walked away from changes to taxation treatment of profit shifting by multinationals. They walked away and now look to return to the issue of how you tax, particularly for wealthy superannuants, how you deal with the taxation arrangements around there. That these are billions of dollars that they could have had locked in and they walked away from, and now what they're trying to do is, you know, for example, bringing the GP tax and the type of things that they're doing in terms of universities. These have big impacts on people, and they're being made to wear the cost of those mistakes that have been brought about on coming to office.
No doubt there'll be a lot of discussion about those individual measures over the coming weeks, so we'll just leave those there, because I do want to spend some time with you talking about terrorism and in particular the impact on the Muslim community and of course the national security issues. You have a special role, I suppose, in this debate as Canberra's only Muslim MP, you get drawn out on these issues quite a bit, and you're very happy to talk about the broader implications, I suppose. So the first thing I just wanted to put to you was whether or not you individually support the proposals the government's put forward for new anti-terrorism laws.
Can I put it to you this way, Chris? If the Director General of ASIO says we have a problem, then I'm listening.
Yep.
I think a lot of us have to. If he had a night of restful sleep, I'd be surprised, because what weighs on him is that the work that he and his colleagues do in terms of gathering intelligence and being able to use that in a way that protects Australians, you know, would weigh on him. So you can have difference of opinion about method, but the first thing we do need to acknowledge is that there is an issue, and we do need to find a way to address it. So certainly, and I've been very impressed with the Director General's moves to, you know, particularly engage in community radio. You heard his comments the other day where he said this isn't directed towards people of the Islamic faith. This is about protecting Australia, and I think we do need to heed that. So I think that's really important for us to acknowledge as a starting point, and then it's where to from here.
Now, those are comments that I think everybody would agree with. I mean, especially you've got to take the advice from the security agencies and trust that they're not going to overstate any threat. You and I had a chat during the week, and I thought you expressed quite eloquently, though, the pressure that comes on people in the Muslim community from this discussion of extremists. Now, I said at the start of the show, we have to be able to talk about Islamic extremist terrorism without suggesting that it's a slight on everyone in the Muslim community. Yet, of course, we must also recognise that it makes life uncomfortable for members of the Muslim community. And some people virtually demand a reaction from Muslims as if they have to own everything that is done in the name of their faith.
Yeah, I think, and that's an important point. I often, you know, recently I've been asked quite regularly, well, why haven't you said anything about, you know, IS and what's happened elsewhere? And you know, I invite people to look at my parliamentary record in terms of where I've spoken out on people that have been persecuted. And I think the other point I'd make too is that, you know, just because, as you rightly, actually you're one of the few commentators to describe this very well, politically moderate Muslims, you know, politically moderate Muslims, if they speak on this, do we expect that extremists will listen? You know, in many respects, we represent for extremists something that they loathe, which is an ability to coexist and defenders, particularly in the Australian context, of people getting on. So just because I say something or anyone else says something doesn't mean that they'll walk away from that violent path. But what is important is being able to find ways to bring people together and to recognise that this does pose, as I said earlier, a serious threat to our way of life. And for a lot of people, either migrants or the children of migrants, one of the big things that people don't realise that motivates them is a sense of gratitude, because we've been given an opportunity in this country to prosper. So to do anything that goes against that is not only, I can understand, offensive to the broader community, but it's also offensive to us because we're failing to repay a debt of gratitude to the Australian people.
So when you talk about that engagement and that and those mutual obligations and responsibilities, obviously you would think that the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott's done the right thing in the past week or so, trying to meet with Muslim community leaders and discuss the terrorism issue with them. What do you think of those significant Muslim community leaders who snubbed him, who said that these terror laws, sight unseen, are really unfairly zeroing in on the Muslim community, and they rejected the chance to meet him and discuss it with him face to face?
A number of things. I certainly would, recognise and applaud the PM in reaching out in that way, but you can't expect me to endorse everything that he's done in terms of the way that he's conducted himself, and I think you and I will have a difference of opinion. I noted the clip that you played from Insiders this morning. I have to say, we have terrorist threat levels in this country for a specific reason, to alert people to potential dangers, and I think it's important that words are used wisely. I was horrified, as many were, about the beheading that occurred with James Foley. Just a truly chilling, and also something that should anger people as well, that this could be done. But to then say this could happen here, unless there is credible evidence, I think the Prime Minister in particular has a very special place in alerting people to threats. So he should choose his words wisely.
We do know, for instance, this is a difficult issue.
I just wanted to come to something that you said too. So he needs to choose his words wisely. But at the same time too, I respect that he is the Prime Minister of the land. He's been elected by the people. And if you're invited to meetings, I think it's wise to go to those meetings, because, as I said, we all have a part to play in being able to unify people. But I think that the Prime Minister does need to, I think there are areas for improvement in the way that he does that.
But people talk about panic and alarm, and you mentioned the need to choose words carefully. We're talking here about a situation where we know over the past decade we've had serious terrorism plots uncovered and thwarted in Australia, more than 20 people arrested and sentenced. And of course we have this situation where 150 Australians, we believe, are operating in Iraq and Syria now with Islamic State. Now that is a new level of threat,
yes,
given that we know what those people could perpetrate if they came back here. So isn't it perfectly reasonable to talk about the fact that threat of those activities being transported back to Australia?
I think in the week where the world was trying to comprehend the savagery of what they had witnessed was not the week to describe it in that way, and I just think that there would be a better way to phrase it without resiling for one moment from the threat that you rightly point out, and that our Director General of ASIO has rightly pointed out as well. It is something we have to deal with. So, it is, this is something that we do need to work through. We need to work through it quickly, obviously, because the threat is real, but to do it in a way that is meaningful and long-term as well. I mean, the issue of extremism, and particularly radicalisation, is not something that you can deal with quickly. I mean, we can go to the reasons why people are doing this. They may be having a sort of reaction that they feel weak and that they need to do this. Well, there's no justification for taking a violent path. But we are going to have to work through this. And I think some of the things that ASIO has done in particular, reach out, I think has been very important and does need to be built upon.
Just to explore that a bit further with you, I wanted to talk to you about some of the more extreme, if you like, or more hardline Muslim community leaders in Australia. And I was going to put to you some of their issues. Some of them signed the letter saying that they wouldn't meet with the Prime Minister last week. Well, as it so happens, Sky News earlier today had an interview with Uthman Badar, the head of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Australia, sitting in the same chair you're in now, talking about his attitude to these terror laws. And we'll just show a snippet of what he had to say on Sky News this afternoon.
If it's not targeting Muslims, why is he exclusively meeting Muslim leaders? And Muslims are sick and tired of the double standards. which show the reality of these policies. So the argument we're being given is, look, there's people going abroad, they're being brutalised, they're being radicalised, they're learning, they're being trained. When they come back, they might do something. Why doesn't that argument apply to Jews who travel on an annual basis to fight and train with the IDF?
Now, that's Uthman Battar, who heads up Australia's division of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Australia. Ed, you'd be familiar with this organisation. I think the comparison he draws there is odious, because dual Israeli-Australian citizens who go back and join a national army that's defending its nation from terrorist attacks is a totally different situation to people going and joining terrorist associations overseas. But Uthman is a very articulate exponent of that point of view. You would understand that his organisation believes in Sharia law and wants to bring back a caliphate. Are those ideas freely expressed in Australia dangerous?
A number of things. Firstly, there is obviously a sense of discomfort that there's a discussion about anti-terrorism laws and the way that it's being done with the broader sort of representatives of various Muslim communities around the country, and I can understand some people making that comment, but the harsh reality is that what we're seeing on our screens is being perpetrated by people who are distorting the faith and are acting in a way that other people, the massive majority of people of the Muslim faith here in Australia, act in a peaceful way and in a way that they want to do the best they can for the country. So it is a harsh reality, but it has to be dealt with. But as I said before, we have to pick and choose. Well, not pick and choose, but pick our way very carefully through this, and also recognise too that, as I said earlier, jabbing people in the ribs and saying, well, why aren't you out there condemning this, and why aren't you speaking strongly on this? In some cases, if I can just be blunt, there have been some news outlets, in particular in terms of News Limited, and this isn't a typical Labor politician bashing News Limited, because News Limited has given me the opportunity to speak on this issue, particularly through the Telegraph. But, there have been some occasions, for example, Tim Blair's piece this week on Lakemba. I mean, how does that help? And are you expected to actually approach a News Limited outlet as a platform to make those comments?
Wasn't he giving people just an insight into what Lakemba is like, a microcosm of a monoculture in that small area?
No, I don't think it was designed to be that type of examination at all. And so if you're expecting... I just want to make the point. If you're expecting people to come out and use that platform to denounce extremism, one, I don't think people will necessarily do it because they stand and look at what's being done. But the second thing is, where this is important to do is within the community itself. It doesn't, you're not going to expect people to be picking up the Australian to do that, though I understand that there'll be people that want to see this denunciation. It has to go in dealing with extremism right down to the grassroots. And again, ASIO is trying to do that very job as well, and to ensure that we give no quarter and allow no room for people to embrace violence as a way to express some other issue that they have, because it's completely unacceptable to the way that we want to live our lives here in Australia.
Just to finish up, I need to pull you back to Hizb ut-Tahrir, an organisation like that which really stands against the sort of liberal secular society we have here, and even democracy, wants Sharia law and the caliphate. Is it dangerous that our openness allows these ideas to be promulgated quite openly within the Australian Muslim community?
It's a test for democracy to be able to manage a variety of ideas. I think the challenge is to beat back the extremist edge, regardless of if it's extremist with whichever faith you talk about, because just like Westboro Baptists and the Ku Klux Klan doesn't speak up for Christianity and shouldn't be seen as representative of Christianity, neither should some of these extreme groups. So we do need to deal with it, but at the same time too, I think the important thing is recognising that the broader, regardless of your faith, people recognise the great thing about Australia is that it has been welcoming and that it has provided opportunity, and people want to work for that. And the type of extremist ideas that you hear, put forward and advocated, they don't get picked up because people will see that as one, doesn't represent them, and two, is a threat to the broader opportunity that's been presented within Australia.
Ed Husic, thanks very much. Really enjoyed the chat on those issues. Fascinating insight there from Ed Husic on the budget and, of course, this issue of Islamic extremist terrorism.